The classroom was filled with the low hum of students gossiping, some chatting about their homework, others talking about what they planned to do after school. Jamal sat quietly in the back corner of the room, his eyes cast down at the desk in front of him. He was a quiet boy, always keeping to himself, never drawing attention. His old, worn clothes were a far cry from the designer outfits the other kids wore, but Jamal didn't mind. He didn't care about fitting in. He just wanted to get through school. The teacher, Mr. Turner, stood at the front of the class, scanning the students as he read through his notes. He had already decided what kind of student Jamal would be. Mr. Turner had seen the way Jamal dressed, the way he sat alone, and the way he didn't participate in class discussions. He thought Jamal was just another kid from the wrong side of town who would never amount to anything. He often gave Jamal assignments that he knew would be too difficult, just to see him struggle. Today was no different. Mr. Turner walked over to Jamal, who was sitting quietly in his seat, head lowered. He knew Jamal could play the violin, but it had been months since he heard anything about it. The last time anyone had asked Jamal to perform, it was in front of a small crowd at a school talent show, and even then, the whispers had been more about his background than his talent. Mr. Turner knew Jamal's mother was a musician, but that didn't mean anything. He didn't believe Jamal had the skill to back it up. "Jamal," Mr. Turner called out sharply, snapping his fingers to get his attention. "Why don't you play something for the class? Show us what you can do. I'm sure it'll be interesting." The other students turned to look, some with expressions of surprise, others with amusement. They had heard about Jamal's violin playing, but no one took it seriously. He was just the quiet, shy kid who always kept to himself. What could he possibly have to offer? Jamal felt his stomach tighten. He wasn't prepared for this. His heart started to race as he slowly stood up from his seat, clutching the worn violin case in his hands. The laughter in the room had started quietly, like an undercurrent, but it was growing. They weren't laughing directly at him, not yet, but Jamal could feel their eyes on him, their unspoken judgment hanging in the air. He walked up to the front of the room, the sound of his shoes on the floor echoing in the silence. When he reached the center, he set his violin case down on the desk in front of him. He opened it slowly, his hands trembling slightly. The instrument inside was old, not the shining new violin many of the other kids had, but it was still his, and it had carried him through many years of practice and personal struggles. It was a part of him. As Jamal adjusted the violin in his hands, Mr. Turner's voice broke the silence. "Come on, Jamal, we're waiting," he said with a mocking tone, his eyes scanning the room to see the others' reactions. The students were already starting to laugh. They didn't expect much. The whispers grew louder, and Jamal could feel their eyes on him, their expectations already low. He had become the joke, a boy who thought he could play something as sophisticated as the violin. He could hear the snickers in the background. "Play something good, Jamal," one of the students called out. "Don't bore us." Jamal closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. He didn't want to be here. He didn't want to play for them, but he had no choice. His teacher had put him on the spot, and now he had to go through with it. Slowly, he raised the bow to the strings and began to play. At first, the sound was soft, hesitant. The bow scraped lightly across the strings as Jamal tried to find his rhythm. The class went quiet for a moment, unsure of what to expect. Some students smirked, still waiting for him to mess up. Jamal's fingers gripped the violin, and he tried to steady his nerves, but the pressure was building. The melody he played was simple, a warm-up piece, something he'd played many times before. It wasn't difficult, but it wasn't supposed to be. He needed to calm himself down, focus, and let the music flow. But no matter how hard he tried, the room felt like it was closing in on him. The laughter, the whispers, it was all too much. But then something happened. As the minutes passed, the sound of his violin grew clearer. The hesitant notes began to come together, each one building on the last. His fingers moved with more confidence, his arm gaining momentum as he lost himself in the music. Jamal was no longer just playing. He was performing, letting the violin speak for him. It wasn't just a song. It was a story. His story. His struggles. His dreams. His pain. All of it came through the bow and the strings. The music wasn't perfect, but it was real. The quiet boy in the back of the room was telling a story, and for the first time, the room was listening. Mr. Turner stopped smirking. His eyes flickered from Jamal to the other students, and his expression changed from one of amusement to one of mild surprise. The laughter from the students slowly began to fade, replaced by a quiet tension. But Jamal didn't stop. He kept playing, his confidence growing with each passing note, each passing second. The classroom was silent now, all eyes on him, all ears listening. As Jamal finished, the room stood still. No one said anything at first. The quiet was thick, almost uncomfortable. Jamal lowered his violin and stood there, feeling the weight of their gaze on him. He wasn't sure what to expect next. But the silence didn't last long. One of the students, a girl who had been mocking him earlier, whispered to her friend, "He's actually really good." Mr. Turner, who had been quiet the whole time, cleared his throat and said, "Well, I didn't expect that." Jamal stood, still holding his violin, trying to ignore the way his heart pounded in his chest. The room had gone from laughter to stunned silence. The unexpected had happened, and now everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. But Jamal didn't care. He had done what he came to do. He had proven himself, not to them, but to himself. And that was enough. The bell rang, signaling the end of class, and the students shuffled out of the room, talking in groups and leaving behind the tension that had hung in the air. Jamal stood still at the front of the classroom, his hand still clutching the violin. But the moment the music had stopped, his nervousness returned. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected them to listen. At least, not the way they had. Mr. Turner, who had been sitting at his desk with a look of disbelief, was the last to leave. As the other students trickled out, he stood up, clearing his throat as he adjusted his glasses. Jamal could feel the weight of his eyes, trying to gauge whether the teacher was about to speak harshly, or if the surprise in his expression would turn into something else. "Jamal," Mr. Turner began, his tone softer now, almost reluctant. "That was surprising." He paused, searching for the right words. "I didn't expect you to play like that. You have talent. I'm not going to lie." Jamal didn't know how to respond. His hand still shook slightly as he held the violin. He felt exposed, vulnerable, like his entire identity had been put under a microscope. He wanted to say something back to Mr. Turner, to tell him he wasn't just some poor kid who couldn't achieve anything. But Jamal wasn't the type to speak his mind. Instead, he nodded, muttering a soft thanks, before walking toward the door. As he stepped into the hallway, the buzz of conversation surrounded him. But it was different this time. The whispers weren't the same. They weren't mocking him. Some students looked at him with respect now, others with surprise, and some with curiosity. The boy who had always been invisible in the class had suddenly become a mystery. Jamal didn't know how to feel about this sudden shift in attention. Was it better for them to acknowledge him? Was it better to stay in the background, away from the spotlight? His mind raced as he made his way to his next class, wondering if things would be different from now on. In the cafeteria, Jamal sat alone at a corner table, picking at his food. He wasn't hungry, but eating gave him something to do, something to focus on other than the feeling of everyone's eyes on him. He heard snippets of conversations around him. Some of the other students were talking about his violin performance. "That kid can really play," one of them said, voice full of surprise. "I thought he was just some quiet kid with no talent. But that was good." "Yeah, who knew?" another student replied. "He's got serious skills." Jamal kept his head down, trying to ignore them, but it was impossible. They were talking about him, and he didn't know how to process it. "Hey, Jamal." A voice interrupted his thoughts. He looked up to see David, a kid from his music class, standing at the edge of the table. David had been one of the students who had laughed when Mr. Turner asked Jamal to play, but now he was smiling. "You were amazing earlier. Seriously, I didn't know you could play like that." Jamal blinked, unsure of how to respond. "Oh, thanks," he muttered. David pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. "I was wondering if you'd want to practice with me sometime. I'm trying to get better at violin, and you're clearly a lot better than I am." Jamal didn't know what to say. He had always kept to himself, always avoided any kind of social interaction. But now, the invitation was sitting in front of him, clear as day. A part of him wanted to say no. He wasn't used to this kind of attention, but another part of him was curious. What if this was his chance to get better? What if David actually meant it? "Yeah, sure," Jamal finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We can practice sometime." David's face lit up. "Awesome, man. I'll let you know when I'm free." As David walked away, Jamal sat back in his chair, feeling a mix of emotions. His heart was racing, and his thoughts were tangled. He hadn't expected any of this. He had only played the violin to escape, to find a small piece of peace in his chaotic world. He never expected it to lead to anything more. But now, things were changing. People were noticing him. They were seeing him, really seeing him. For the first time, Jamal wasn't sure how to feel. He wanted to celebrate, to revel in the newfound respect, but at the same time, it terrified him. He had always been the outcast, the one no one cared about. Now he was the center of attention, and while that was a good thing, it also came with a weight he wasn't sure he was ready to carry. Later that afternoon, as Jamal walked home, his thoughts were consumed by everything that had happened that day. The mockery that had turned into awe, the invitations from students he had never spoken to before. It was all too much. He couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about the violin. There was something deeper at play, something Jamal couldn't yet understand. As he approached his house, he saw his mother sitting on the porch, her violin resting beside her. She smiled at him when she saw him coming. "How was school, baby?" Jamal shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant. It was fine. But his mother, as always, could see through him. "What happened?" she asked gently. Jamal hesitated for a moment before sitting down beside her. They laughed at me. Mr. Turner made me play the violin in front of the whole class." She didn't react with shock, only waited for him to continue. "At first, they all laughed. They didn't think I could do it, but I played, and they stopped laughing. Some of them even said I was good." He paused, his voice quieter now. "I don't know if I want all this attention. I didn't play to show off. I just wanted to play, to get away from everything." His mother nodded, her eyes soft. "I know, sweetie. But sometimes, when you have a gift, people are going to notice. You can't hide it forever." Jamal sat in silence, contemplating his mother's words. The unexpected had happened today, and he didn't know if he was ready for what came next. But for the first time, he felt a spark of something inside him. Something bigger than fear, something like hope. The days following Jamal's performance were a blur. His world, once quiet and predictable, had shifted in ways he couldn't yet fully understand. At school, it was as if he had become a different person. Everywhere he went, people spoke to him. Students he had never really noticed before, teachers who barely acknowledged his existence, now all seemed to want a piece of him. Jamal had never felt more exposed. In the hallway between classes, Jamal overheard snippets of conversation from groups of students. They weren't mocking him anymore. No, it was the opposite. They were talking about his talent. "That kid, Jamal, man, he can really play," one of the jocks was saying. "I thought he was just some quiet kid, but his violin was on another level." Jamal's stomach twisted. He had always been the invisible one, the one who stayed in the background. But now, the attention was undeniable. Every time someone said something positive, it made him feel more and more out of place. The respect felt heavy. He wasn't sure if he wanted it. As he made his way to his next class, Jamal couldn't help but notice the way people watched him. Some smiled at him, some nodded, and some just stared, curious about the quiet boy who had been hiding such a hidden talent. But despite the compliments, Jamal couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The respect felt forced, like people didn't know what to do with him now that he had revealed a part of himself that no one had expected. That afternoon, Jamal found himself standing in front of the music room. The door was ajar, and through the crack, he could hear a faint hum of violins. He took a deep breath before pushing the door open, finding David, the same kid who had invited him to practice, sitting on a stool with his own violin. "Hey, Jamal," David called out, noticing him at the door. "You ready to practice?" Jamal smiled nervously. He wasn't sure why he had agreed to practice with David. Maybe it was because he didn't know what else to do. Maybe it was because, for the first time, someone was offering him something he wasn't used to. Friendship. Yeah, Jamal said quietly, stepping into the room. David gestured for him to sit beside him. "I think if we work together, we could get really good at this. You've got so much talent, man." "I know it." Jamal sat down next to him, taking his violin from its case. The familiar weight of it in his hands brought him some comfort, but the anxiety still lingered. He had never really played for anyone else before. And now, every note he played seemed to carry the weight of everyone's expectations. What if he wasn't good enough? What if this was all just a fluke? David began playing a simple tune, his fingers moving across the strings with ease. Jamal watched, mesmerized for a moment before joining in. The sound filled the room, echoing through the walls. But as they played, Jamal couldn't ignore the fear in the back of his mind. What if I mess up? What if they realize I don't deserve this? But as the music grew louder and more confident, Jamal felt the tension ease. For the first time in days, he wasn't thinking about what everyone else thought. He wasn't worrying about what people expected. He was just playing. He was just Jamal with his violin. And for that moment, the world outside the music room didn't matter. David stopped playing abruptly, his face lighting up. "See, you've got it. Man, you're amazing." He looked at Jamal, clearly impressed. "No joke. You could be a real star if you wanted to. You just have to believe it." Jamal felt a lump form in his throat. He didn't know how to respond. He wasn't sure if he even wanted to be a star. He didn't want all the attention. He didn't want people looking at him, waiting for him to perform. All he ever wanted was to play for himself, to escape the world around him for a while. But now, it seemed that escape was slipping further and further away. "Thanks, David," Jamal said quietly. "But I don't know if I want that." David raised an eyebrow, clearly confused. "What do you mean?" "You have the chance to do something big. People will respect you, man." "I don't know if I want their respect," Jamal replied softly. "I just want to play." David's smile faded slightly, but he nodded. "I get it. I do. But you're really good, Jamal. And sometimes, people need to see it." The words echoed in Jamal's mind long after the practice ended. Sometimes, people need to see it. But what if he wasn't ready for them to see it? What if being seen meant something else, something he wasn't ready to handle? The next day, in class, Jamal tried his best to ignore the glances that were still being sent his way. Every time he sat down at his desk, it felt as though all eyes were on him. His classmates, who had once ignored him, were now watching him, waiting for something, anything, that would prove their newfound respect wasn't misplaced. He could feel their anticipation, and it made him want to shrink back into the shadows. But he couldn't. Not anymore. The bell rang, and Mr. Turner entered the classroom with a stern look on his face. "All right, everyone," he said, his voice commanding attention. "I want you all to take a seat. We've got a special announcement today." Jamal froze. The last time Mr. Turner said something like that, it was about Jamal's performance in front of the whole class. Was he going to make him perform again? Was he going to push him into the spotlight even further? Jamal glanced around the room, noticing that many of the students were eyeing him with a strange mix of expectation and curiosity. He swallowed hard, gripping the edges of his desk. "Jamal," Mr. Turner said, looking directly at him, "I've decided to let you play for the entire class again. Show them what you can do." The room went silent. Jamal's heart pounded in his chest. The pressure, the weight of everyone's eyes on him, it was unbearable. He didn't want this. He didn't want to be the center of attention anymore. But in that moment, there was no turning back. Jamal stood slowly, his hands trembling. The bow of the violin felt heavier than it ever had before. The spotlight was on him now, and he wasn't sure if he was ready to step into it. The classroom was eerily quiet as Jamal stood, his violin trembling in his hands. The weight of the instrument felt like 1,000 pounds, and his heart raced faster than it ever had before. All eyes were on him, his classmates, his teachers, the ones who had once mocked him, now waiting for him to play again. There was no escaping this moment. "Go ahead, Jamal," Mr. Turner said, his voice unexpectedly soft, almost encouraging. "Show us what you can do." Jamal swallowed hard. He had never felt so exposed in his life. His mind screamed at him to sit back down, to tell Mr. Turner that he wasn't ready, that he couldn't do it. But there was no backing down now. He looked around the room, his gaze meeting the curious, hopeful eyes of his classmates. They were all waiting for him to play, expecting him to be this perfect, talented performer. But Jamal wasn't sure if he could live up to their expectations. He closed his eyes, breathing in deeply, trying to calm the chaos inside of him. The nervousness, the fear, the doubt, it was all overwhelming. But in that moment, one thought stood out among the rest. What if I just played for myself? The thought surprised him. What if he didn't have to perform for anyone else? What if he could just lose himself in the music and forget about the pressure? He took a deep breath, and for the first time since this whole ordeal had started, he made a choice. He would play for himself. Jamal placed the violin beneath his chin and tightened his grip on the bow. He closed his eyes once more and let the first note flow from his fingers. The room was still, hanging on every sound, but Jamal was lost in the music now. The bow moved across the strings, each note pure, rich, and full of emotion. He felt the tension begin to fade as he played, his body swaying slightly with the rhythm. The melody was slow at first, gentle, as if Jamal was testing the waters. But as he continued, the music grew more confident, more passionate. It wasn't just the technical skill that mattered anymore. It was the feeling behind the notes. Jamal wasn't playing to impress anyone. He wasn't playing to prove anything. He was playing to release the storm inside him, to let the music carry away his fears and doubts. His classmates sat motionless, some with mouths open, others with eyes wide in disbelief. They had never heard anything like this before. Jamal's talent was undeniable. It wasn't just good, it was extraordinary. It wasn't about perfection or technique. It was about the soul he poured into every note. As the piece reached its crescendo, Jamal's fingers danced across the strings with a fluidity that seemed almost impossible. The room seemed to hum with the power of his performance. He played through the fear, through the pressure, and for the first time, he truly felt free. When the final note rang out, there was a moment of silence, almost as if time had stopped. No one moved. No one spoke. It was as if the room had collectively held its breath, waiting for the music to sink in. Jamal stood there, his violin still against his chin, his heart racing, but for a different reason now. He felt alive. He had just played his heart out, and in that moment, everything else faded away. Then, the silence was broken. The first clap came from David, who had been sitting at the back of the room. It was hesitant at first, unsure. But as Jamal looked up, he saw David's eyes wide with admiration. Then, one by one, the other students joined in. The applause grew louder, more enthusiastic, until the whole class was clapping. Jamal's face flushed. He didn't expect this. He didn't want this. But it was happening, and there was no stopping it now. He lowered the violin slowly, a faint smile on his lips. But inside, he was conflicted. The applause felt good, but at the same time, it felt like an invasion. He didn't want to be seen as the kid with talent. He didn't want to be put on a pedestal. But it was too late. He had already done it. He had already shown them who he was. Mr. Turner stood up, his face lit with pride. "Jamal," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "That was incredible. I knew you had it in you." Jamal didn't know how to respond. He didn't want to thank them. He didn't want to be praised. He just wanted to leave the room and find somewhere quiet to hide. But as he looked around, he saw the genuine respect in their eyes. They weren't just impressed. They were in awe. They had seen something in him that they hadn't expected. They had seen his soul through the music. As the applause died down, David came up to Jamal, his face still full of excitement. "Man, that was amazing. I told you, you've got something special." Jamal nodded silently, still processing everything that had just happened. He had done it. He had played with everything he had, and it had changed the way people saw him. But now, the question lingered in the back of his mind. What happens next? He wasn't ready to answer that yet. The rest of the day was a blur of whispers and congratulations. Jamal didn't know how to handle the attention, and by the time the final bell rang, he couldn't wait to leave school. He just wanted to be alone. He didn't know if he was ready for what this newfound recognition would mean for him. That evening, as Jamal sat in his room, practicing his violin alone, he thought about what had happened. He had stepped into the spotlight, and there was no turning back. But he also realized something else. He wasn't afraid anymore. He had shown them who he was, and even though the attention was overwhelming, he felt proud of what he had done. The next day, Jamal walked into school with a little more confidence in his step. He had faced his fears, and in doing so, he had discovered something about himself. He was more than just the quiet kid in the corner. He was someone who could stand tall, someone who had a gift to share. The journey was far from over, but Jamal knew one thing for sure. He was no longer afraid to be seen. The day after his unforgettable performance, Jamal sat in his room, the violin resting gently in his hands. His thoughts drifted back to the classroom, to the look on his teacher's face, and to the way his classmates had reacted. He had spent the night replaying the performance over and over in his mind, wondering if it was real, if it had really happened. But it had. And now, everything felt different. The following morning, Jamal walked into school with a mix of anticipation and dread. He could feel the stares, the whispers that followed him as he moved through the halls. It was as if the entire school had heard about his performance. He had always been the quiet kid, the one who kept to himself. Now, it seemed like everyone wanted to know him. As he entered the classroom, Jamal was met with an unusual silence. For a moment, it felt like time had stopped. His classmates were all looking at him, some with curiosity, others with admiration. Even Mr. Turner, who was usually so reserved, couldn't hide the smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Jamal felt the weight of their gazes, but this time, it didn't crush him. Instead, he held his head a little higher. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like he was invisible. "Jamal," Mr. Turner called out, his voice carrying through the classroom. "I just want to say that what you did yesterday, it was something special. You showed all of us that there's more to you than we ever imagined." Jamal nodded, trying to hide the rush of emotions that were bubbling up inside him. He wasn't used to this kind of attention, and it made him uncomfortable. But it also felt good. The bell rang, signaling the start of class, but Jamal wasn't focused on the lesson. His mind kept returning to what had happened the day before. The way his violin had sung through the silence. The way the music had felt like a part of him, as if it was speaking the truth he had never been able to put into words. At lunch, Jamal sat alone, as he usually did, but this time he wasn't left alone for long. David, the student who had been the first to applaud, came over and sat beside him. "That was insane yesterday, man," David said, his voice full of excitement. "You're incredible. I had no idea you were that good." Jamal smiled faintly but didn't say anything. He wasn't sure how to respond. David, sensing his discomfort, added, "Hey, no pressure. But you know, if you ever want to play in front of more people, I'm sure we could get something together. You've got the talent, Jamal. You could go far with this." Jamal's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't thought about performing for anyone else again, but what David said made him think. Maybe it wasn't about impressing people. Maybe it was about sharing something he loved with others. "I don't know," Jamal said quietly. "I'm still not sure if I'm ready for that." David shrugged. "It's okay. No rush. But just so you know, you've got something special. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Jamal looked at David, feeling a wave of gratitude. He hadn't expected to make a friend through all of this. He hadn't expected anything to change so quickly. But here he was, sitting with someone who saw him differently now. Someone who believed in him. Later that day, as Jamal walked home, he couldn't help but replay the events of the past 24 hours in his mind. He had gone from being the kid in the back of the room, hiding his talent, to being the center of attention. And yet, despite all the praise, there was something inside him that still felt like it wasn't enough. He wanted to prove to himself that he could do more, that he could push past his fear and share his music with the world. He stopped at the park on his way home, taking the seat by the old oak tree where he had first picked up the violin so many years ago. The familiar weight of the instrument felt comforting in his hands. He didn't need an audience. He didn't need applause. He just needed the music. Jamal took a deep breath and began to play. The sound flowed from him effortlessly, a melody that was born from the deepest parts of his soul. For the first time, he wasn't playing to impress anyone. He was playing to express himself. Every note he played felt like a release, like a weight lifting from his shoulders. The music was a part of him, and for the first time in a long time, Jamal felt whole. As the last note echoed in the quiet park, Jamal lowered the violin and sat in silence for a moment. The wind rustled through the leaves of the tree, and for the first time, Jamal felt at peace. He had found something he loved, something that gave him purpose, and while he wasn't sure what the future held, one thing was certain: he would never hide his talent again. The next chapter of his life was just beginning, and Jamal was ready to embrace it, one note at a time.